Good morning to everyone. I think perhaps I must start from where Sibusio ended to respond to some of the challenges that you have already alluded to. I think firstly is that we announced, I think on the 2nd of April, that we now have what we refer to as the National SMME Database. So it was launched then on the 2nd, and I think the following day, we started receiving applications. And these were applications for what we call the Debt Relief Fund. Now, with this Debt Relief Fund, in total, we had about 500 million rands, which was basically the budget for this scheme. But when we launched, we actually had two schemes. One was the Debt Relief Fund, where we were basically targeting all enterprises that could prove that they were impacted by COVID-19 negatively. And with these enterprises, we're giving them a maximum of 550,000 rand each. And what we're looking at was to basically cater for their municipal bills, the payroll assistance scheme was built into that, and also your working capital. So just to fast forward, with regard to this very same scheme, the SMME debt relief, we then later realized that the funds are not sufficient. We then partnered, or rather entered into an agreement with the Department of Labor to specifically look at the issue of payroll. So, and how this was introduced was that in South Africa, in fact, I liked what, I'm not sure if it was Merville or one of the colleagues here was talking about compliance. We had actually realized that the majority of our people were generally not compliant. In this particular instances, that many of them were not registered with UIF. So the scheme, how it worked, now I'm talking about the payroll assistance scheme, which is built in this relief fund, because I want to explain the relationship with the Department of Labor, was that we had people that were generally registered and those who were not registered with the UIF. Now, those who were registered with UIF, meaning that they were paying UIF all along, they could directly apply at UIF and they would get their relief fund from UIF. But we had people that were also running enterprises and they had employees and they were also impacted negatively, but they could not apply simply because they were not registered. So we said as the department that we will cater for those. And that was the component of that segment that we are going to support financially, those who were not necessarily registered with the UIF. However, the condition there was that we would request them to register first. So in other words, we would simply require them to produce proof of registration, and we will then use that as sufficient documentation for them to be compliant. So we did not want to penalize them for the sins they have committed prior to COVID-19. So we're saying, go and register, give us the proof that you are now registered, and we will consider your request. So due to this inadequacy of funds, we ended up signing an MOU with UIF to say all of them, they will now be funded through UIF. And even before that, maybe I do need to mention that those who had applied, in terms of how much we were giving them in respect to the payroll assistance, was that the determination were made by UIF. So we were simply catering for those who were non-compliant, but we were not making the determination in terms of how much they would get. Instead, the determination were as per the UIF processes. So that is the one aspect. of that. And I'm just quick to raise this because I do know, and I've heard that a lot of people were already complaining and they were asking about the support from the UIF and so forth. So I felt, let me quickly clarify that aspect in terms of those who were compliant and those who were not non-compliant. And the second scheme that we had in addition to this relief fund was what we called the growth facility. Now, the business growth facility was meant to target those people that were providing, in essence, what we refer to as essential services. You know, the guys that were producing your sanitizers, your chemicals, your dishwashers, your masks and all that. And even those who were producing those products that all of a sudden they were flying off the shelves, like your tissue and so forth, including the food. So those people, we felt that, okay, they also do need some form of a relief, much as they are not necessarily impacted negatively, but instead they have a greater opportunity to increase capacity, simply because all of a sudden there is this huge demand of these essential products that they are producing. Now, with those ones, we were treating them according to existing processes within our agency known as SIFA, and we were giving them up to 250,000 Rand for the micro enterprises and up to 5 million Rand for the small enterprises. And for the medium enterprises, we're giving them up to 15 million Rand. Now, that is basically the entire bracket of the SMME that we're covering. So in this instance, we're looking at companies and institutions that were already operating and they were demonstrating the need to grow simply because they do have huge demands from the market. So these were the two schemes that we launched as early as the 2nd of April with the very same budget. I must mention, I must repeat that actually, with a budget of 500 million Rand. And when we did the math, we realized that the budget indeed is not sufficient. And I must hasten to mention that we had received about 35,000 applications. And of those, about 15,000 were what we refer to as complete applications. In other words, they were compliant, they had all the supporting documents, they were actually eligible to be funded. And yes, we had about 20,000 or so that were incomplete. This simply means that they were either non-compliant, or there was a document missing, or a certain document maybe had expired, maybe a tax clearance certificate, and so forth and all that. And in the mix, we also had, for lack of a better word, I would say, chance takers. Those that had that government is now offering this funding, and for some reason, they were very creative and started cooking some, documentation that they would then submit to us for consideration. So that was also part of the mix. And I'm also alluding to this because we have also observed as a department that all of a sudden there were lots of fraudsters out there, others, posing as agents, officials from the department, or agents on behalf of, accounting firms and so forth, who would assist people to access funding and all that. So there were a lot of scams that were at play already. So a week ago, we then issued a media statement, the minister basically announcing the closure of the first window. And this was primarily because of the very same reason I had mentioned of funding. And perhaps to answer the question that Sibusio mentioned about the second window, is to say that as things stand, we do not have the second window per se, or the third. We are awaiting additional resources. I do know that there are processes underway, and once we have received those funds, we will then communicate, formally, so to say, what will happen going forward. And I'm saying this because it is the funds that are going to inform, or rather influence, the form and nature of the second window, if I may put it that way. Depending on how much we may get, we may decide to continue with the schemes as they were, or we may introduce additional schemes in the relief context. But obviously, it is dependent on the resources that we may be able to harness in this short space of time. What we do know is that time is not on our side because people need the relief now, and the challenge and the impact, it is actually felt by many now rather than later. But in the mix of these, we also had what many of the banks spoke about earlier on here, and this is what we refer to as a debt restructuring program. And with this debt restructuring program is that we had also agreed with our agency, which is SIFA, to say that even those that were funded by government, as opposed to the banks, they may not be able to pay, or meet some of their financial obligations, and we do need to come to the party. And as a result, SIFA then had to restructure their debts. Obviously, in this case, in terms of the restructuring, it wasn't really just a one-size-fits-all, but it was to say that each and every application or what I would refer to as an existing debt will be looked at differently, perhaps based on one. Some of these entrepreneurs, you'd find that they do have existing contracts and they might be expecting some money in the coming months or so, and we would look at that. Some of them, they were perhaps in the export businesses, and all of a sudden the borders were closed and they could no longer ship out their goods, and the majority of them, they were in production and they could no longer produce anything. Therefore, they could not supply their markets, whether it is locally or internationally, they couldn't. So there were varied reasons why some of these entrepreneurs would actually have been impacted negatively, and we then agreed to restructure their debt through our agency known as SIFA. And we also applied the same principle to say, yes, there will be a payment holiday of about 6 months. And I must also mention that all our funds are actually in a form of a loan, and I'm not talking in particular in reference to this in particular, but to all our programs, to say we all, the support we are offering comes in a form of a loan, and that loan, it is at prime minus 5%, and that is standard across all the schemes. So in a nutshell, this is what happened much earlier, right at the beginning of this wave of COVID-19, and in response to what the president had already promised the country, to say that there shall be a relief, SMME relief program that the department will manage, and we then developed these packages. Now, after we announced the closure of the first window, we then now introduced new schemes, and perhaps this is what Sibusio referred to as Township Business Support Scheme. And these schemes that we have introduced were mainly targeting the low end of the SMME. And this far, we have only introduced about 3 of those, and we will be, I guess, launching about 5 or so in the coming week or so. So for now, I would talk to just the 3 that we have launched last week. Some of you might have seen the media statement. Okay, I think one of our colleagues, I said, who Mildred, if you could please mute yourself, or if the host could assist. Thank you very much. Okay, actually, before I talk about these schemes, there are a few things maybe that I must mention. And one of those is in relation to the compliance aspect that my colleagues earlier on spoke about. And I'm saying I want to mention this because some of these elements were already in the media space, and some of you might know or might have heard that there were some court cases as well. So I want to just quickly mention that in all our schemes, it is a must that an enterprise that is applying for support has to be registered with CIPC, which is the Companies and Intellectual Property Registration Office. And we are simply trying to encourage South Africans to start doing business, you know, formally so, and in the right way. I mean, right now, it is the very same taxpayers' money that is being used to actually fund all these mechanisms, you know, in a form of relief funds. So that is why it is very important that all enterprises that would like to access the same support, that they also register. So I think I cannot justify the reasons enough, you know, as to why enterprises or companies have to register. So this is a standard compliance issue to say, are you registered? What kind of an entity? And when we talk about registration, we are accepting all form of registration, including for cooperatives as well. So as long as there is a certificate of registration, it does not matter if it is a private owned company or it's a cooperative, but we accept all of them. And we also know that some of, especially the sole proprietors, do not necessarily register with CIPC, but we will then insist on them having either a trade certificate, you know, like the plumbers, for instance, or if they do have a permit from the local municipality. So we need some form of, you know, verification to say that we are dealing with a legit, you know, entrepreneur here, because especially as I've alluded earlier on to say that there are also a whole lot of, you know, chance takers out there. And in addition, it is important that they also register with SARS. We all know that part. And as I've also spoken about the issue of UIF, that we are saying, we know, we understand that the majority of our people, they were not necessarily registered. But now we are encouraging them to register. And all we are saying is that we just need the proof of registration with UIF, and you are then eligible to apply for any of our schemes. Now, the more controversial aspect was whether our schemes, in terms of the criteria, do we look at the BEE compliance element of the enterprise? And the simple response is that in this regard, we are saying we are targeting 100% South African businesses. So when we say South African businesses, it does not matter the level of compliance in terms of BEE. It does not matter who owns it, as long as it is South African. And then we then said furthermore that the employees must also be 70% South African. So it is 100% ownership by South African, 70% employees must be South African. So those are the general qualifying criteria to say who are we targeting for these schemes. And I think briefly, that is the qualifying criteria in relation to all the programs. And maybe let me quickly talk to the 3 schemes. And then if there is anything else, we may respond to that maybe during the question and answer session, because I might just take much time. Firstly, we have a scheme which we call the informal and small scale clothing and textile support scheme. So this is a clothing and textile support scheme. And I mean, many of you, you'd know that government is now promoting the cloth mask. And some of you know, these enterprises are in the very same businesses. But we are also supporting through the very same scheme, you know, people who are doing your seamstress, the sewers, your garment makers, you know, your designers, your pattern cutters, you know, your tanners, all those. So all the people in the space, they are eligible to apply for this. And of course, the compliance is, as I have alluded already, is as simple as that. This scheme it is also in a form of a loan. But I must also mention that all our schemes, they are accompanied by what we call the business development support. So I do know that most of you might know that the Department of Small Business Development has got two agencies. We've got the Small Enterprise Finance Agency, which primarily offers funding. And then we also have SEDA, which is the Small Enterprise Development Agency. And then through SEDA, we have now created a program which we call the Undergraduate Scheme. Now, with the Undergraduate Scheme, we basically went out and partnered with, I forgot that CETA, but it's the relevant CETA. And to say, we do know that there are some young accountants out there who are unemployed, or accounting and auditing graduates who are out there. So we worked with them and they created the scheme, and this young undergraduate people, they are part of that scheme, and their primary responsibility is to support the enterprises that we have supported. You would know that the majority of some of the enterprises that we are supporting lack some of the basic skills. For instance, we have seen this especially with the spaza shops, where you find that these people, they know how to run the business, but they don't necessarily understand the things that Mervyn was talking about, the cash flows and all that, the stock taking and all that. So we have this team of young qualified people who are now providing such support. So I will talk about the support, the spaza shop program later on, just to further expand on this aspect. So with this scheme, the clothing and textile support scheme, we are giving you a maximum of 10,000 rand, which is basically the working capital, to cover the cost of your production inputs. And this is also backed by a revolving credit facility. So here again, we are saying, if you are able to service that loan and that money somehow becomes available for you, and hence it becomes a revolving credit facility. Now, and with this array of the business advisors that we also have within SEDA, we do know that there will be some guidance that will be offered to you as an entrepreneur on how much you must direct whether it is for buying additional material, or for saving, or for repaying your loan, and so forth and all that. So basically, in a nutshell, that is the scheme that we have. It's not really much, because we are really targeting the lower end of the SMME sector. So it's about just 10,000 rand that we are offering. And as you know, if these are the people that are in the business of producing like your cloth mask and so forth, the amount might seem small, but it might just be adequate for buying the material and so forth. And again, having said that, it must be understood in context to say, when people get funding, it does not necessarily mean that they must then use up all the money and then basically chow all the profits. This is the money that they're supposed to basically reinvest in their businesses. So our view is that should not be a challenge for most of these enterprises that are in the clothing and textile, because most of them are really operating at a very low scale. Quickly, to go to the next program, we have introduced a new program which is called the Automotive Aftermarket Support Scheme. And here we were basically targeting your auto mechanics, like your motor mechanics, your heavy equipment mechanics, the tractor and forklift mechanics, diesel, fillers, and all those, the panel beaters, those that are in the tire and glass fitment businesses, the auto spares, and all that. So this is a scheme that is targeting those guys that you see on the streets fixing your gearbox now and then, or your tires and so forth. And again, with these guys, we are giving them a capital injection, which also has a revolving credit, and the maximum we are offering there it is 20,000, which is for the working capital, and the 20,000 is for your body repairs and your mechanics. And then for the spares, the auto spares shops and your auto fitment centers, we give them a maximum of 30,000 rand. So the auto spares, they will get 30,000 rand, and your mechanics that you generally see along the road, they will get a maximum of 20,000. And this also has a credit, a revolving credit facility. So that is the scheme. And of course, I won't be talking much about the qualifying criteria, because I did mention earlier on in my introduction that in terms of compliance, we'll look at all those registrations to say, do you have a certificate? And do you have a tax clearance certificate? Are you registered with the UIF? And what we have also done is that we do have an array of outlets. These outlets, for instance, is like your CEDA offices, where you can walk in and actually get, where you can walk in and get an official who can assist you to register. This is in case some people say, but I'm not registered with CIPC, I don't have a certificate. They can go to one of those. And with regards to the spaza shop on this aspect, we went one step further and partnered with Nedbank, and we also partnered with Standard Bank. Now, in other words, a spaza shop can walk into a Nedbank branch or a Standard Bank branch and get assisted with all this. In other words, with one, the compliance aspect, make sure that they are registered. Secondly, make sure that they do the actual application on the scheme, on the relevant scheme. But in this case, I'm talking about just the spaza shops. So the third scheme that we have, it is what we call the Bakeries and Confectionaries Business Support Scheme. Now, this one, it is targeting specifically the bakeries that we know in the corner shop or somewhere in the township. So, but they must be owner managed. So in other words, the owner must be part of this business, one or the other. And with this, we are saying that we will target bakeries and confectionaries with a turnover of less than 500,000 rand. Now, those that are making more than 500,000 rand, we will only offer them the business development support. So this business development support I spoke about, it applies to all our schemes, including the spaza shops. So if you are making less than 500,000, we are saying that we will then give you a capital injection. And in this case, the maximum that we are offering for the bakeries is the 20,000 rand. And also this very same scheme comes with that revolving credit facility. And then for the confectionaries, the maximum you get is 10,000. So we are saying for the bakeries, they will get 20,000 rand. And for the confectionaries, they will get a 10,000 rand. Your confectionaries would be, that shop that makes those cakes, for, the birthdays and all that. So those little shops there, that corner, so they will get a maximum of 10,000 rand. And lastly, as I conclude, is that we have the spaza shop support program. And with the spaza shop support program, we are giving them a 3.5 capital injection with a 3.5 revolving credit facility. So in other words, all in all is about 7,000. But the difference with this one, much as I do refer to it as capital injection, it's actually not a loan for the spazas. So in other words, they don't have to pay back this money. But because the Minister of Finance would not be happy with us if we use the words grant, so we chose not to use that word grant. But in essence, the spazas would not be paying back that money, but we are saying they will only tap onto the credit facility a component once they've exhausted the capital injection. In other words, a smaller spaza shop, once it has been approved and they have received a bank card from the participating bank, as I mentioned, the two banks, which is Standard Bank and Nedbank, which are our partners in this case in terms of the spaza shops. So once they have that a card from the bank, they will then go to a participating wholesaler. So we have also, I would say, accredited an array of wholesalers throughout the country, so that we can also promote the issue of bulk buying and also discounted prices. Now, these people, they can go and actually buy from a wholesaler near them where they are, and at a very much lower prices, because we have already negotiated with those wholesalers some of the prices. But what is very interesting about the card that they will be using is that much as this card is from the bank, it cannot withdraw cash from the ATM. It can only be used for the purchasing of the stock. So that is basically the support that we are offering for the spaza shops. So as things stands, it means I have basically spoken to you about 4 programs: the Bakeries and Confectionaries scheme, the Clothing and Textile scheme, the Automotive Aftermarket scheme, as well as the spaza shop support program. And the 2 that we had earlier on, which is the Debt Relief Fund, as well as the Business Growth Facility, those 2, as we speak, they are on hold until we announce the second window. I think, let me pause here, because I can actually talk, until the cows come home. So we'll wait for the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Noko. Just to quickly put you on the spotlight, I know, ladies and gentlemen, we've actually run out of time, but out of interest, we still need to cover what we need to. 513 million window has closed, and the department's website is showing us a number of 1 million, I'm zooming now, 1,497 that have been approved. In relative to the 513 million, supposedly there's still applications being processed. Are we able to roughly link an amount of what could be the approvals from a rent terms? Because I could be an SMME online right now that has put an application through, and hearing that the window has closed leaves me now shattered that, oh, I'm not going to benefit. Yet maybe the process is still happening, and I might be getting a response.
No, that's very true. But perhaps I must be very cautious in how I respond to this one. You would recall I did say that we had about 15,000 complete applications. But what you are referring to is the total disbursement so far, which is basically about 10% of those applications that were complete. So yes, the truth is we are still processing those applications, and I'm afraid I would not be able to, in rent, value, say how many more in addition to what has been disbursed would be, because what we have disbursed does not mean we have exhausted the 500 million. So, and again, I said the maximum we are offering was 550, but we also had people that were applying for just 100,000 rand or a 50,000 rand. So it's really not, and at this point in time, I have to be very honest and say I'm not at liberty to give the figures in terms of what is to happen going forward with the remainder of the applications. But knowing very well that internally there are some processes. For instance, we are moving some funds from some of the schemes that were in existence previously, and we may not be proceeding with those schemes simply because of the dynamics of the environment, the changing dynamics of the environment. So we may use those additional funds, and also the additional allocation that we may be getting from Treasury. So it does not mean that someone who is in the, let's say, remaining 14,000 will not be considered. And it does not mean either that all of them, they will be catered for. Maybe something else, and I know I'm putting myself in a bit of a conundrum here, is that even those that were incomplete, we have said to them, they must resubmit their applications. So we are not saying they must reapply. We are saying they must resubmit. In other words, they must go and look for whatever the documentation that was outstanding and resubmit. And we will treat those applications as they were initially submitted. In other words, the date of submission would be considered as the initial date of submission. This, in essence, it means the numbers are going to increase in terms of now the complete applications. But maybe to allay the fears, in a nutshell, I can simply say we are indeed expecting some money, and we should be able to assist most people.
Thank you so much, Noko. Back to you, Gary.
Thank you, Noko. I suppose the one thing that I'd like us to deal with offline with you is to look at how the SASDC can play a role in supporting any of our businesses to access these programs and through some form of a relationship with the Department of Small Business Development. We acknowledge from the onset and have been working since the beginning of March on ways in which we can provide support from a non-compliance to a compliance support program to our ecosystem of certified suppliers, as well as our extended ecosystem of Black-owned township-based businesses in the Gauteng environment. So we'll definitely have a chat to you in that regard. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached 12. So I'd like to just open up the floor for 5 minutes, if possible, for any questions or comments from a process perspective. If you have a question, please type the word question in the chat box and post it for us to acknowledge you. You could type the question in itself after that. If you have a comment, please type the word comment, and we'll see if we can give you the floor. We will acknowledge the persons that we are giving the floor to at the time. We won't be able to entertain all of the questions and comments from the floor, but what we can do is we'll give you direction in terms of how we will handle the process going forward. So I'd like to open the floor now for questions. The first question comes from, is it Judical? And the next is from, okay, let's first hand over to Judical. What you can do is just unmute your mic and then you can pose the question.
Hi, Chris, can you hear me?
Sorry?
Yes, I can hear you.
No?
We can hear you?
Yes, Chris, I wanted to ask about purchase order funding. Can you please elaborate on purchase order funding if you guys can finance us about it? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure if I got the question right. You're asking for that to the SASDC?
Or the SMD, the department.
Oh, the department. With regards to direct funding.
Yes, for a purchase order, for example. Yeah.
Okay. Can I request, because what Noko has covered is a whole lot of different funding schemes that have been developed by the department in response to COVID-19, over and above other schemes that are already available within the marketplace. Can I request, Judical, that we have a chat to you directly? If you can maybe just send us an email or whatever with your specific request, and we can see what we can do to assist in channeling that through to Noko. Something, and if you can be more specific around what your funding request is. Okay, can I move on to, so Judical, will you send the email?
Yes, I'll send it too. Thank you, Chris.
Lovely. The next person is, oh, I'm terrible. I'm going to just mention the surname. Mchuno. Mchuno.
Ngena Ngcungculu.
You can unmute your mic.
Macingwane, unmute your mic, Baba.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Oh, you've raised your hand. Please unmute your mic and ask the question. Are you having a challenge with unmuting your mic?
Are you able to unmute him, Gary?
Let me see. I'm going to see if I can unmute him from here. Okay, I can't unmute.
And Ngcungculu, perhaps drop us an email at on the email address Chris has put through there, COVID-19 Chris at sasdc.org.za.
Okay, next we've got, so I'll move on to the next question. We've got someone on the line for Think Law. Please unmute your mic.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Can you hear me?
It's Gary speaking, but go ahead.
Oh, hi, sorry, Gary. My question to the gentleman from the Department of Small Business is that I heard him speak about growth financing for people who've got who have to supply essential services. My question is essentially, what about small businesses that have purchase orders that are not related to essential services but have been impacted by the COVID-19? Is there financing or financing mechanisms for them available?
Okay, Noko, do you mind providing a response to that?
Yes, I think a quick one is that they will definitely be considered if they've got purchasing orders. The unfortunate part is that the very same scheme, the business growth facility, has also been put on hold. Therefore, what they could apply for is under CIFA, we have what we call bridging finance for as long as they do have a purchasing order. So in other words, it's not really in the context of a relief fund, because in the context of a relief fund, the scheme that we had was the business growth facility. And as things stand, as I had alluded, that is on hold until announced otherwise.
Thank you, Noko. Mervyn, from Nedbank, do you guys have some form of facility that Think Law could tap into? Hi, Mervyn. You can unmute yourself. Okay, I think maybe.
Sorry about that. So, just in terms of facilities to assist in your normal working capital requirements, we have a number of facilities. One is invoice discounting, where we can look at discounting the invoice, provided it's from a top-tier company. Secondly, we have an overdraft facility that can assist in fulfilling that gap between waiting for your money and paying your supplier. But these funding is in the normal course of business, and it's outside, the COVID relief. The relief funding specifically, you've got to be have experienced the impact of COVID on your business, and it's primarily for your operating expenses. But this is a normal cost of business. Overdraft facilities, invoice discounting is what we can offer.
Okay, thank you very much, Mervyn. I think that's a question that very often comes up, and perhaps Sibu, Chris, and the rest of the team, we should look at having a specific session on where we invite financial institutions to come and share how they are able to provide support or financing for purchase orders and contract financing, etc. Just as a general discussion. The good thing is having the order, but the challenge to fulfill it if you don't have the finances, it's kind of like an opportunity lost. So as a next step, we'll see what we can do to have a special session to speak specifically to that type of financing. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see any further questions. So I'd like to hand over back to Sibusio to close off the session with a few words. But from my side, thank you guys very much for being part of this session. We will be sharing the link. We will be posting this onto our website, on our YouTube portal, so that you can actually listen to it again. And with that, I'll hand over to Sibusio.
Thank you, Gary. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for participating today. To our guests, Old Mutual, Nedbank, Department of Small Business, thank you very much for being part of this discussion. All we are trying to do as the SASDC is add value to our Black-owned businesses that are within our ecosystem and those outside of our ecosystem, because COVID-19 is affecting everyone, and it doesn't matter how big or small your business is. Just survival tips in this difficult period. Please, ladies and gentlemen, chase that cash. Invoices outstanding, see if you can get that money in, because earlier we spoke about the issue of cash flow. Cash flow is king. We need that money in the bank. Like it was earlier stated, do talk to your bank should you have any challenges servicing your facilities. And there are government support structures out there. And thank you, Noko. You shared what's there and what's likely to come. And opportunities to revisit your costing structure. What's your minimum viable proposition? Look, let's reassess where we are as businesses and reach out to your customers and suppliers as well. Like I said, COVID is affecting everybody, but drop that email to your client and check, are you well? Can I service you? Your suppliers, if you owe them, speak to them as well. And find out, are they still trading? Because we are likely to see a huge drop or a huge effect that is going to be negative on some businesses having to close down during this period. And ladies and gentlemen, please, always opportunities in crisis. Turn on your antennas. Let's not sleep. Let's work. Let's see, how do you diversify? What products can you bring in that are different from your norm in response to COVID-19? And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, but this will be posted on our resources page. Please do visit our page and see. For anyone who has any challenges or questions or comments, please do email us at covid-19@sasdc.org.za, and our WhatsApp number is on the screen, 064-064-1296. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for participating. We shall be advising of the next date of our next webinar, and please do participate. Throw some comments as well on email, what else you would like us to cover, so that we can do some research and at least offer you meaningful and productive information. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And goodbye. Enjoy the rest of the day. We hope you found it informative. And all of the best to you, your businesses, your families. Keep safe and let's see how we can get through this together. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, SASDC, for making it possible for us to listen to this. We appreciate it.
Dankie baie, ons het dit
Thank
geniet.
you.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was
Everyone.
great.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you soon.